I had no idea that for the next 3 years, they were intercepting my phone calls, they were intercepting my emails, they had 3 different FBI surveillance teams tailing me. And then finally in January of 2012, I was charged with 5 felonies coming out of that interview, including 3 counts of espionage. I mean, espionage in many cases is a death penalty charge.
So 2002 is when all of this took place. 2002 is when you became aware of these techniques. You decided to leave the CIA in 2004, correct? For bigger and better opportunities.
Yeah, I got a job offer with a private company that was exactly double what I was making at the CIA. I had just gotten married again. I had 2 kids. And yeah, I decided to just make a real change, a real career change.
So from 2004 to 2007, you obviously still were living with this information and this knowledge. What made you decide to become the whistleblower in 2007 from what you had learned in 2002? Why so long?
To tell you the truth, I waited for somebody to say something. I knew that there were dissenters inside the CIA who were objecting to this program like I did, but nobody came forward. Finally, in December of 2007, Brian Ross called me from ABC News, and he said he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I had never laid a hand on Abu Zubaydah or on any other prisoner. And he said, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. Well, a couple of days later, President Bush gave a press conference, and he looked right in the camera, and he said, we do not torture. And I knew that that was just a lie. It was a bald-faced lie. And then a few days later, in response to a reporter's question, he said that if there is torture, it's the result of a rogue CIA officer. And I thought, Brian Ross's sources at the White House, and they're going to pin this on me. And so I decided I wasn't going to wait any longer. I was just going to tell the truth and let the chips fall. So I went on that interview in December of 2007, and I said 3 things. I said the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy, and I said the policy had been personally approved by the president himself. So within 24 hours, the FBI began investigating me. They investigated me for a full year until December of 2008, and then they closed the case. They sent my attorneys what's called a declination letter, meaning they're declining to prosecute me. 3 weeks later, Barack Obama becomes president. I had no idea that Obama asked Eric Holder at the Justice Department to reopen the case against me secretly. This was at the urging of John Brennan, a former boss of mine who became the number 2 at the National Security Council and then later went on to become the CIA director. John asked Obama to ask the Justice Department to reopen the case. I had no idea that for the next 3 years, they were intercepting my phone calls, they were intercepting my emails, they had 3 different FBI surveillance teams tailing me. And then finally in January of 2012, I was charged with 5 felonies coming out of that interview, including 3 counts of espionage. I mean, espionage in many cases is a death penalty charge. And so the government was seeking 45 years in prison. They offered me a deal that I take a plea to 1 espionage charge and I do 30 years. And they told me that if I take it, I might be able to live to see my grandchildren. And I said, I'm not doing 30 minutes. I didn't do anything wrong. There's a legal definition of whistleblowing. It's bringing to light any evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety. And that's exactly what I did. So they came back just a few days later and they said, do 10 years. Take a plea to an espionage charge, you do 10. I said, forget it. They came back at 5. I said, no. They came back at 3.5. And I said, no. I said, I didn't do anything wrong. And my attorney, who had been an attorney for more than 50 years at that point and is like the marquee name in criminal defense in Washington, said to me that in all his decades as an attorney, he had never seen the Justice Department come down in time with each subsequent offer. Normally, they'll make an offer, and if you say no, they'll come back with another offer later, and it's for more time. I said, why are they doing that? And he said, because they have a shit case and they know it's shit. So he said, we are not taking a plea, we're going to trial. Well, in the meantime, ProPublica, the investigative journalism website, came out with a study in which they found that the federal government wins 98.2% of their cases. Well, finally, the government came back and they said, all right, you take a plea to 2.5 on a reduced charge. We throw out all the other charges. You do 23 months. So what do? It becomes an economic decision. Do you roll the dice and risk 45 years knowing that you have a 1.8% chance of winning? And realistically, I said to my lawyers, if I lose, what am I looking at? They said 12 to 18, probably closer to 18. Or do you just take the 23 months and make the whole thing go away? That's an easy decision.
You know, and it's easy for somebody watching this right now that's not in the line of fire to say, well, if you didn't do it, why take a plea? I don't think everybody can understand that.
That's not the justice system.
It's unfortunate because I'm sure you did not view the justice system the way you do now until after you become its food.
I never gave any of this 5 minutes of thought in my life, but I remember saying something that's to my lawyers in the beginning that was so naive in retrospect that it's actually funny. I said, once I get in front of a jury and they see how ridiculous this is, they're going to acquit me on all charges. And one of my lawyers said, you think this is about justice. This isn't about justice. This is about mitigating loss. This is about making this as easy to swallow as possible. Well, when they finally offered me the 23 months, I initially said no. I emailed my attorneys at like 6 o'clock in the morning and I said, I'm not doing it. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to trial. They drove over to my house. It was a Saturday morning. They drove over to my house, texted me to put a pot of coffee on. 3 of them came. I had 11 lawyers, if you can imagine. Cost me almost $1.2 million. So they came over, and the one that I liked and respected the most pulled me aside and said, if you were my brother, I would beg you to take this deal. He said, this can be a blip in your life, or it can be the defining event of your life. Make it the blip. And so it was that conversation that convinced me to take the deal. I have 5 kids. I couldn't risk dying in prison.
So John, let's kind of talk about that for just a second. I haven't heard you talk a whole lot about your family. You're married. You have 5 children. You've just accepted the fact that you're probably going to go to prison. It's no longer just a possibility. It's a reality. How has this affected, or during that point in time, how were you explaining this to your wife? How much did your children know? What were you going through internally watching how this was basically not just affecting you, but the people around you as well?
Well, my wife had been a senior CIA officer as well. We met at the CIA. We married while we were at the CIA. She went with me to that Brian Ross interview. She sat just off camera. And when I finished the interview, I said, how did I do? She said, great. I said, I didn't say anything classified, right? And she said, no, you did great. So she was wholly, entirely supportive through the whole experience. When it was all over and I came home, the PTSD set in, and we are in the final stages of divorce right now. She just couldn't take the pressure anymore.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
How about the children though? How did you explain to your children that how old were your children when you were going to prison, and how did you explain to them that you were going to be leaving?
My 2 older boys from my first marriage were 19 and 16. And so they followed the news. They were supportive. Their friends were supportive. My oldest was in college. His professors pulled him aside, said that I had done a heroic thing and not to let anybody bother them or bully them. And none of that ever happened. Everybody was very supportive. My three younger children were a lot younger. Let's see. My son was 8, my daughter was 6, and my youngest son was a year. And so what I told them was, I said, I've been in this fight with the FBI. And I said, unfortunately, I lost. And so I'm going to have to move to Pennsylvania for 2 years, and I'm going to teach bad guys how to get their high school diplomas. And they accepted that. They were sad, but they accepted it. And then after 3 or 4 visits, they were in the visiting room one day, and I entered the visiting room through a door that had a sign on it that said inmates only. And my son said, "What does inmate mean?" And without thinking, I said, "It means prisoner." And he said, "So do you work here, or are you a prisoner here?" And I said, doggone it. I said, "Well, buddy, I'm a prisoner here, but it's for a really complicated reason. I did the right thing for the American people, but the FBI was really angry at me." And he accepted that. And of all my 5 kids, he was the only one that had trouble dealing with it. But, we got him counseling, and he got right through it. With my wife, it was different. It was this delayed reaction PTSD that it didn't really hit until I got home. We were back on our feet. I was off paper. And then she just decided she's going to walk.
I imagine it's a pretty hard life to live, being not just you, but people that are around you right now with, you're in the spotlight all over the place. You finally made my show. So you finally, but
all the time, just in the last week, I was on Fox News 4 times and CNN once. So yeah.
And if she's still trying to pursue any type of a career, I imagine it's gotta be hard.
She's an executive in a defense contractor, and I'm kind of a peace and human rights activist, and the two don't really mesh.
That's what my conclusion I'd come to. So your relationship with your children is good now.
Great. Yeah. Great.
So let's talk a little bit about your prison experience, because I'm sure there's nothing you're going to talk about here that people haven't heard a million times about going to prison. But I am curious. So while you were in prison, how did the inmates and guards and other staff members treat you? Did they treat you as like a spy? Were they worried you were going to tell on them, or what was what was it like the day-to-day in there for you?
Quite the contrary. Somehow, I have no idea how, a rumor got started before I arrived that I had been a hitman for the CIA. And so the Aryans just thought that was great. They called me the Muslim killer. I don't know where that came from. So one day, he was the shot caller for the Aryans, pulled me aside, and he said, "Is it true that you were a hitman for the CIA?" And so I said, and I actually congratulated myself for my quick thinking. I said, "Listen, it was wartime, and we all did things we weren't proud of." And he just said, "That's cool, man. That's cool."
That's hilarious.
So I didn't say yes. I didn't say no.
You didn't say yes. You didn't say no. You kind of left him guessing a little bit.
Yeah.
Probably something a real hitman would say. That was probably pretty spot on.
But what really saved me, though, was, my case was so high profile. It was on the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Italians had read about it. And the Sunday before I arrived, there was a story about me on the front page of the New York Times. And so this one Italian guy took it upon himself to go to all the other Italians to tell them, to make sure that they understood the difference between a CIA officer and an FBI agent. An FBI agent's a cop. An FBI agent arrests people. A CIA officer is not a cop. He doesn't have arrest powers, and he's out there catching Muslims to make us safe. And so when I finally arrived, the Italians welcomed me with open arms. And for the whole time I was there, I was with the Italians.
So you had no issues in prison?
Zero.
Now, I've heard some other weird, I know personally, but I do want to kind of clear the air a little bit. There's different classifications in prison, federal prison. camps, lows, mediums, pens.
Yes.
Whenever people refer to you, they were like the penitentiary. Were you in a penitentiary?
No, I was not. In my sentencing, my attorneys asked the judge to send me to a minimum security camp. And for your viewers who don't know, minimum security camps have no bars on the windows. The doors are generally unlocked. There are no fences. You're kind of free to come and go as you please, so long as you don't abscond. A lot of the guys work in town. And the prosecutors had no objection. So she hit her gavel and said, "So ordered." So I get to the prison. I turn myself in 6 weeks later. And it's a camp attached to a low. So I had to turn myself in at the low, and they put me through the metal detector and frisked me. And then they start leading me around to the back of the prison. And I said, no, I'm supposed to be at the camp across the street. And the guard kind of laughed and said, "Not according to my paperwork, you're not." Well, it took me 5 days to get access to a phone. And finally, I called my lawyer and I said, "Hey, they put me in the actual prison with the murderers and the drug kingpins and the pedophiles. So what do I do?" And he said, "Oh my God." He said, "Well, we could file a motion, but it'll take 2 years before we get a hearing, and you'll be home by then." He said, "I'm sorry, buddy, you're going to have to tough it out." And so I decided that very day, I was trained for this. I was going to fall back on my CIA training to make sure that I remained safe and at the top of the social heap. So you're right. There's a minimum security camp, which is easy. But then there's low. It's also called a medium low. Then there's the medium, which is also called medium high. And then there's the penitentiary. I was in the low.
Which you came to find out isn't as, probably was not as bad as you had imagined it being.
No.
Because of the type of people, nobody wants to get in trouble to low, because if you do, you get bumped up to a medium high.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the guys, pedophiles aside, because all the pedophiles have to be in a low. It's too dangerous for them to be in a higher classification prison, and they're not allowed in the minimum security. So the place is just overflowing with child molesters. Besides the child molesters, most of those guys have worked their way down from a penitentiary to a medium to a low. And they've got a certain level of freedom at a low, and they don't want to blow that and then go back up to a medium or a high.
And you seem like the type of guy that's going to have the right demeanor in there. I mean, with all the training you had, at the very least, I would imagine you've got some amazing social skills to be able to converse with people.
I actually wrote a book while I was there that did very well. It's called "Doing Time Like a Spy: How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison." And
do you have a copy of it sitting there?
It won 2 awards. It won the Penn First Amendment Award, and it won the Forward Review's Memoir of the Year.
Where can people pick this up on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. And it's on Amazon hard copy or hardcover and also download. But it did really well. And it starts off with these 20 life lessons that the CIA taught me and how I used them in prison to, I hate to say it, but to manipulate other people, to get other people to do my dirty work, and to make sure that I protected myself, not necessarily from other prisoners, but from the guards, the COs. That was the only danger to me, was the COs.